Now it's time for Dan Mall to drop some knowledge on us. Dan is very active in the design systems community, and you may or may not have seen him around on LinkedIn. If you haven't, are you even on LinkedIn? But I want to thank him so much for being here today and for sharing his knowledge with us. He is running Design Systems University now, dropping knowledge left and right, and he does not discriminate. So thank you so much. Without further ado, the time is yours.
Maria, thank you. Everyone, thank you for letting me talk to you and share some things with you. I'm going to get my screen share started, and you all should see I should see some color bars in front of you. If you don't see that, please paste that in the chat. I'll monitor that, so I'll keep an eye on that, but hopefully you all should be seeing that. Let's get that open. There it is. Okay, shout out to Drexel alums in the chat. Yes, I went to Drexel. I live in Philly. If anybody lives close by, we should hang out. All right. When Maria asked me to speak at DSW Day, I asked her what the event was about, and she shared the theme with me, which is evolution and innovation, pushing the boundaries of design systems. I love that. That's so great. I really like the prompt that was on the website too for the event, which said sound design systems are challenging to make and maintain, especially in the niche areas that differentiate our products. How can we push our systems to support our design and eng teams? I love speaking at events that have a very strong theme like this. And so, Maria, again, thank you for inviting me and allowing me to share some stuff. I only have a few minutes to speak here, so I was thinking, like, okay, in a short talk, if I could share only one thing or a handful of things with an audience, what would it be? You know, what are the most important things and the most important takeaways? I think a lot of you here, as I look at the attendee list, work in-house at companies on design system teams, or that either have or aspire to have design systems. Personally, I don't have that experience myself. I've never worked in-house anywhere. I'm a consultant and a coach. What I don't have in terms of depth of expertise in a design system, I hope I make up for in the breadth of design system work that I've done with many different teams over many years. I've worked with and consulted on lots of different design systems. And with the short amount of time I have today, I want to share some of the biggest pitfalls, and in particular, the one biggest pitfall that I've seen over and over, again, across different teams and organizations, for why design systems fail to take root. It's because of this. It's because design system jobs aren't defined well enough. In terms of the theme of this event of pushing the boundaries of design systems, I think sometimes we don't even know where the boundaries actually are. So, you know, before we can push the boundaries, sometimes we need to just find the boundaries first. And so what does that even mean? What even is a boundary? I like this definition. I appreciate this definition from the book aptly titled Boundaries by Dr. Henry Cloud and Dr. John Townsend. And it says a boundary, when it comes to a person, is a property line that defines a person. It defines where one person ends and where somebody else begins. This is a thing that I try to practice as much as I can in my own life, personally, with relationships, with friends and family. I try to teach my kids this stuff too. And it also applies to work as well. When it comes to design systems, I think there's traditionally two major factions that exist. There's people who make the design system and then people who use it. Sometimes those are the same people. Sometimes those are very different people in different groups. So as a starting point, when we're talking about boundaries, let's try to delineate the differences between the two, where one role ends and where one other role begins. As Maria was saying, I run a community group called Design System University. Every month, among other things, we have an open working session called Study Hall. So last week, our Study Hall topic was actually design system career ladders. And in order to define career ladders for folks working in design systems, we had to start by defining just the roles themselves. You know, what are the roles, what are the responsibilities and the expectations of people working on design system teams? So the first question that we kind of teed up to our group that we had a really good discussion about was this. It was what is a responsibility that you know for sure should be handled by a design system professional? And that could be a designer, an engineer, a product manager, a content person. You know, it doesn't really matter. Just whatever roles might exist on a design system team, what are some of the responsibilities associated with that? And I encourage everybody to think of stories of their own design system work and their own experience with others. Now, if you look at this, look at the results here, there's a lot of varied things here. So I'll just read out a couple. Some people are saying like, well, people on a design system team need to build things, maintain things, contribute to things, market things, evangelize, write articles and guides, do communications, do UI design, do front-end development, respond to support questions, prototype interfaces, recognize good work, hold office hours, educate, advocate, chronicle, audit. The list goes on. Establish standards, participate in design reviews, all of that kind of stuff. There's a lot of things here. So if we put all of those in this category box, we have something that looks, something like this. Build, maintain, contribute, market, evangelize, et cetera. Some of those things that I read out. What do you notice about the stuff in this box? You notice anything? There's a lot of stuff that people on design system teams are responsible for. And in fact, if the design system team is responsible for a lot, there's actually not much left for the product teams to do on their own. And so if this is the perspective of the design system team, I think, unfortunately, this starts a pretty vicious cycle. This is where a particular expectation tends to surface. The design system team starts to martyr itself sometimes. The team thinks like, well, we're doing all this stuff. The least that the product team could do is, and I'd be curious to know how you would fill in the blank of that. The least that they can do is what? I'll advance the slide here in just a sec. But the least that they can do is contribute. Oof. I think this kind of thinking is sort of the beginning of the end for some design systems. This kind of thinking is often the kiss of death for design systems. It's really most of the times an unrealistic expectation that's reinforced by a true sense of pride from the design system team. So it's well-intentioned, but I think it's misplaced. I think it is very real. All right, so let me show you what I mean. First up, let's compare the size of these lists. Right, the design system team has all of this stuff to do, establishing standards and building and maintaining and marketing and evangelizing and all this. And all we're asking from little old product teams is to contribute. Right, so of course, the design system team is going to start to be resentful if they've got all the stuff to do and product teams, all they're doing is just contributing to the system. It seems like an imbalance there. Now, second of all, of course, the product team would get resentful too. All of a sudden, the work that they enjoyed and the work that they were good at, building, creating, designing, got taken away and replaced with something that they don't even know how to do. So if we evaluate the work, the design system team has mostly product work to do. A lot of the stuff on that list is actually just good old product work. And now the product teams have the expectation of doing systems work. Well, that's weird because no one actually gets to do what they're good at. If the design system team is doing product work and the product team is doing systems work, why are we in different seats there? So, sometimes the design system team will relent and say, okay, fine, you can build some stuff too. We want you to contribute, but, build a couple of things. And so the product team says, whoa, hang on a sec. Like building stuff is on its own a full-time job. Like that is one job that takes people the hours that they are working the week. We can't do that and contribute too. And of course, the design system team gets even more resentful now because they go, we're doing all this stuff. We're wearing all these hats. Why can't you do that? And that, my friends, is a one-way ticket to burnout. In her excellent book, Set Boundaries, Find Peace, Nedra Glover Tawwab shares a really great list of what boundary issues at work look like. And I just want to read through this list here. Boundary issues at work look like doing work for others, taking on more work than you can handle, not delegating, saying yes to tasks you can't responsibly complete, engaging in stressful interactions, doing jobs intended for more than one person, not taking needed time off. To me, I don't know about you all, but that sounds a lot like many design system teams that I know and have worked with. And again, all of this is well-intentioned, but think of the impact of all of these things. This is how people burn out. So what can we do about that? What are some solutions to this? Well, I want to share a couple of tips that I found to be helpful. And most of them are just reframing mechanisms for design system teams to help them really hold their boundaries and keep a manageable sense and a sensible pace of scope and of work. So first, maybe let's acknowledge a more natural way that components end up in a design system, right? A lot of teams approach it this way that I'm going to share. They approach it backwards because it feels more intuitive when it's actually counterintuitive. So first of all, the design system team generally makes a bunch of components in isolation, cards and footers and headers and tabs and accordions and all that kind of stuff in advance of product teams working on their features, because they think, again, well-intentioned, if we have all this stuff ready in the can, in the hopper, then when product teams get there, we'll have the stuff available to them that they'll be able to use. right? So then once a product team starts building a feature, the components that the design system team made will somehow just fit and slot in perfectly to suit the needs of that product team. Now, that is a nice fantasy, but it is a fantasy. This whole make system, use system thing is a total fantasy. It's oversimplified. It would be wonderful if it worked that way. I can think of a time that I've worked with a team and it's actually worked that way. Here's what's more realistic for a lot of teams. Let's say, for example, you have 4 different product teams, right? Each of them have their own jurisdiction, their own features, or their own things that they're making for users, and that they're in charge of shipping. That's great. That's what product teams are supposed to do. That's what they know how to do. That's what they're good at and trained at and have experience at and all that. Now, some people would look at this and go, okay, there's no system here. And I would like to reframe that a little bit. In fact, a different way to look at that a lot of people don't realize is, if you have 4 teams, there's a good chance that each team has its own system. So rather than looking at all of this as it's 0 systems, it's actually 4 systems that are not connected to each other. Within their own, they are connected internally, but they're not connected to each other. So there's no larger system that connects them, but they're all these, and I've heard a lot of teams call these local systems, and I think that's a really good word for it. So if you look at it that way, then the design system team's job is to connect those teams together, not to create new components. There's already a ton of components here already, right? They just exist in local systems. And so the job of the design team, the way to connect the product teams, is to identify what these 4 teams are already doing in common by accident in isolation, to be able to do that stuff on purpose, right? The product teams themselves shouldn't do this work because, 1, they're busy focusing on customer need, and 2, they're not paying attention to what all the other teams are doing, and they shouldn't be. The design system team should be doing that work because honestly, they're not doing anything else. And we need someone whose role is just that, right? The design system team should be doing this work. It gives them the bandwidth to be able to look across the organization, especially if they're not making components. Okay, so they might be able to identify, for example, something that all 4 teams have created that are very similar, identical or very similar or close to it. They might look at this and go, hey, all of you have this star component over here. And so the job of the design system team is then to abstract and average that star component or whatever that thing is in a way that all 4 teams can use. The design system team can centralize that component and then redistribute it to each of the teams in a connected way. Now, it's a simple example, and it gets way more complicated very fast, but look at all the good that's done here. Each team's local library just got a lot smaller, right? They each went from 5 individual components to 4, which is a really good thing. There's now a centrally managed system for things that are common. In this case, it's 1 component to start with. So there's no more, when it comes to that component, no more redundancy, no more inconsistency. That's great. That's moving. That's progress. The design system team doesn't have too much work to do. It's not overwhelming. It's not at risk of burning them out. Their job is to contribute and manage only 1 component for now, and to continue to look across these 4 teams or more teams for common things that might emerge that they can then centralize. Right? The product teams themselves, they don't have too much work to do. Their jobs are their jobs. They can continue building features without having to worry about building it for everyone to use or knowing what other teams are doing or contributing that in a way that other people can use it. That's really out of their jurisdiction, which I think is a good thing. So the chart that we looked at earlier, which is much more imbalanced and overwhelming, starts to look a little bit more like this. Right? The primary job of the product team remains to build features for users. That's it. And yes, the design system team has more items, but each of these items is a little bit smaller. So they should cumulatively, that's a hard word for me to say, net out to be about equivalent to what the product team is doing. And that balance is important. We don't want the design system team doing more work than the product teams. We maybe want the product teams doing a little bit more work than the design system team because they are doing things that are user facing, and those are things that help users, which ultimately helps the business stay in business. So we want to keep that balance intact as close as possible. It might not be 1-to-1, but maybe try to keep it as close to that as you can. Which I think brings us to an important point, which is a thing that some people will say hallelujah to, and some people will reject outright, and a whole set of people in the middle. I think a design system team's job is not to create. And I think a lot of design system people and people who get into design systems want to be the creator of standards. Instead, I think a design system team's job is to continuously collect what's common. So just looking at the things that other people have created, celebrating those things, centralizing those things. So what we're doing now is we're starting to put some boundaries around the role and around the roles so that we have a clear distinction between a design system team role and a product team role. And we'll come back to that idea in just a minute. So before we do that, I want to codify this simple learning into some steps that I think eventually can become a practice that we can do over and over again. The first thing is that product teams work on a feature, right? That's the first thing that they're supposed to do. That's a thing that happens usually before a system exists. So we want product teams to continue doing their work. And yeah, great comments in the chat here that, product teams are under a lot of pressure, and sometimes we don't realize that because they're delivering things to end users when all things are going ideally as they're supposed to. That's what creates customer value. And those are the things that a design system team should support. So after a product team works on a feature, the design system team then can come in, extract and abstract some of the common components that they see into a central library. We're going to come back to the idea of common in just a second. After that, the product team can work on, or a different product team or the same product team can work on a new feature or a new part of the product with newly available components that the design system team just extracted and abstracted. And the last thing is just a rinse and repeat. So now that product team has worked on a new feature, the design system team comes back in, extracts and abstracts from that new feature. Then it goes back to another product team to use that new stuff. And that's how your design system grows over time and grows organically in a way that doesn't put contribution in the wrong place or doesn't put adoption in the wrong place. Each team gets to do what they do really well. And the cycle becomes a virtuous cycle as opposed to a vicious cycle. I call this the measuring spoon cycle because I think to me it looks a little bit like a measuring spoon. It's got like a handle on one side and then a spoon part. I know it needs work, but that's the best that I've got so far. Okay, let's go back here. Yeah, let's go back here to this example. If we use the measuring spoon cycle, that gives us a lot of benefits. And so let me call out a few. Let me show you a few of what that might be. So let's say product team B over here in the top right has a request. They go, they want the ability to add an icon to that star component. Can we make that component support an icon? So what do you do when a team, and actually I would love if anybody has an answer to this, post it in the chat. Let's see. When a team requests a feature, what do you do with that? Do you put it in a backlog? Do you do it right away? Do you say no? Do you make them angry? What do you do with that request for that? And I'll add a little bit of context to that. You're not too busy to add it as a design system team because you're not building components. You're doing this, you're just collecting common stuff. So the question becomes, should you add it? Should you add that icon feature or icon option or anything like that? In my opinion, the correct answer is no. Think about how the star component made its way into the design system in the first place. It's because in this example, 4 teams needed it at that moment. Right? So remember this, the job of the design system team is to continually collect what's common. So what that means is if it's a common need, we will add it. And if it's not a common need, then we won't. That's a really simple role definition that is very important because it adds clarity. And the more people that know that, the more people know what to expect. You're not rejecting a request because you're too busy, which is why a lot of teams reject that request. You're not rejecting it like the team that's asking for it or the person that's asking for it, which a lot of times gets personal or people take personal. What you're doing instead is you're trying to do the job that everyone understands that you have. And hopefully everybody does understand that because you're communicating that over and over again. The design system team's job is to collect the things that are common and continuously do that. And so because of that, we're not going to be accepting every request. We're not going to be building new components for the system. That's the job of the product team so that we can be the curators of the common stuff in the middle, the central stuff. In order to do that, though, we need a criteria for what common means, exactly what's coming up in the chat, right? Can you anticipate common? Well, what does common even mean? Luckily, there's a great line in Ian Fleming's 007 novel, Goldfinger, that can help us out. Of course, we should look to media and other sources to solve our design system problems. I love this because once is happenstance, twice is coincidence, 3 times is a pattern. So that's the rule that I use with a lot of design system teams. If 3 or more teams need it, then it's worth contributing to the system. If 3 or more teams share the same need, it's worth working on. Until then, we just sit tight. And if you need help remembering this, remember, if it's good enough for 007, probably good enough for us. It is much easier to say not yet to someone than to say no outright. It's usually more acceptable, to them. And a lot of times they don't take it as personally. So if you need the language for that, here's a script that you can use. You can take a screenshot of this. I know the videos of this will go out later. Here's a script that I generally use to politely refuse a design system request that doesn't fit the criteria. It says, Our role is to work on the most common stuff, which means 3 or more teams need it right now. This request that you're making isn't common enough yet. It's only the second time that we've been asked about it. If you know of one other team that needs this, we would be happy to bump this up in our priority in order for us to work on it. Right. And that lets people into the process and lets them know where you are. The next level to this is when a lot of design system teams make their roadmap public. So a lot of people can anticipate that even before they come and ask you for it, right? That's the next level of it. Takes a little bit of maturity on the design system side to be able to do that. But if you can swing that, please do so. I think it's a beneficial move. All right, let's go back here for a sec. Let's say your design system has grown with all the right stuff, right? Everything in there is common. As 3 or more teams have needed it, that means the local libraries are shrinking and the central library is growing, right? At this point, what I see is a lot of teams seem to commit the same sin. They are tempted to build as much as they can using the design system and the design system only. So what's wrong with that? It sounds great, right? That's utopia. That's the design system dream. Isn't that what we've all been working toward? Well, the problem with that is if you keep building everything with the design system, then you will never have anything to contribute. You'll just keep recycling the things in the design system, go into the products, nothing goes back into the design system, and you'll keep just designing things and building things that are already in the design system. And that will mean the end of innovation for your company. So how do you prevent that? Well, one other tip that I like to share is I use an 80-20 rule, and I give this tool to teams that to teams that I work with a lot. The 80-20 rule basically says at least 20%, which is if you have 5 components on a page, 1 out of those 5 components of your interface must be created from scratch. And then on the flip side, the complement to that is no more than 80%, which is 4 out of every 5 components. No more than 80% of your interface can be made up of design system components. And what that does is it creates a balance of things that you are gaining efficiency and consistency and cohesion and cohesiveness from the system as you use it. Those things should go super fast. Those things you should be not spending a lot of time on. And then you also get a chance to innovate, get a chance to do something new, create something from scratch, create new opportunity for new customer value because you're continually growing that skill set. On every team that I've ever worked with, there's usually at least one person who loves creating an interface quickly with the design system. It's like a dopamine hit. It's a speed run, right? To just see how many things you can build with all the stuff in the system. That's awesome and really fulfilling. On every team that I've ever worked with, there's also usually at least one person who wants to break out of what's common to do something new and exciting. And that's an important thing too. To be able to do that scratches the itch for a different kind of person who really wants to invent and do new things. Right? You need both of these people on the team and at the company. And by the way, I should mention, I'm talking about product teams. So this is the guideline that a design system team might give to a product team to say, here's how we would like you to use the design system. Use it for about 80% of the stuff, up to 80% of the things that you're building. And we would love to see you doing at least 1 out of every 5 should be a new thing that we might consider for later contribution in our design system if we see that becomes a common need. You need both of these kinds of people on any team and in any company. So using a rule or a guideline like the 80-20 makes sure that you are leaving room for both approaches. And this way, what happens is that your design system always has an opportunity to grow because your product and your organization are also growing, right? Every time here, there's something new here. Oh, this team came up with a tree component, and this team came up with a speech bubble component and a triangle component, and all of these kinds of things that eventually, when other teams that are connected see those things and they go, hey, we could use that too, or we could use a variation of that, then those needs that were once innovative become more common, and it raises the bar for the product quality at your company or on your team. And there you have it. I think that's my time in about a minute. 4 quick tips for better design system boundaries. Just as a recap, collect what's common. If you're on the design system team, remember the measuring spoon cycle. I'll try to work up a better name for that. If anybody has a suggestion, please, I'll consider it. 3 times is a pattern. If it's good enough for 007, it's good enough for us. And some version of an 80-20 guideline or rule. Last thing that I want to leave you with for today, a final quote from Nedra Glover Tawwab in that book, Set Boundaries, Find Peace. In that book, she says, boundaries are not walls. We don't put up boundaries to keep people out. Walls keep people out. Boundaries show people how to exist in a relationship with you. And that's really what we want. We want a good relationship between the design system team and the product teams. We want that to be a growing relationship where you know the things that you can do together. Think about a sport that you might like to play. I like playing basketball. You might choose tennis or pickleball or football or anything. For a lot of sports, it's important to know where out of bounds is, right? You have to know where the boundaries are. But once you know it, you don't really focus on that as much. You spend way more time concentrating on what's happening in bounds. That's what makes the game fun and collaborative and competitive, so that you can have more fun or win or achieve whatever it is that you're playing for. Strong boundaries are a very key ingredient in helping us figure out how to win, how to have fun, and how to do the things that we want to do with our design systems and with our products. Thank you all for being great listeners with an active chat. Please connect with me on any of these places, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, on my website, any of those things. I'd love to answer any questions you have about this talk or about anything design system related. I'm going to hang out in the Slack channel for a bit. So if anybody has any questions that you want to pop over in the Slack channel, I'm happy to answer them over there. Thanks a lot, everybody. Thanks again, Maria, for inviting me, for the Design System Wednesday crew and community. You all are awesome. I appreciate being here. Thanks, everyone.